In marriage, many people believe that the more spouses sacrifice for each other, the more perfect their marriage is supposed to be. But is that true? Is there a point when sacrifice is no longer a virtue? What do you think? That's the question we tackle on today's episode of Master Your Marriage.
Welcome to the fifth episode in the series of destructive losing strategies. Now, just as a reminder, all of these losing strategies are based on the works of Dr. Terry Real, Dr. Jennifer Finlinson-Fife, and also, of course, Dr. John Gottman, who in their own right with their work has been mentors to both of us. Over the last 4 weeks, we've talked a lot about how every couple sort of hits this wall or this point in their relationship where they wonder, have I made the right choice in my partner?
Mm-hmm.
Do I like the way she chews?
Where they look at their beloved and they think to themselves, how could that person do that? How could that person think that way? How could that person want those things?
Or even act that way.
Yeah. And when we fall into this sort of disillusionment, we generally resort to one of 7 losing strategies that brings out the worst in all of us.
I think that's the thing to kind of remember, that these losing strategies really bring out the worst person.
The worst version of yourself, and is very detrimental to the relationship. So exactly.
Just as a recap, the first 4 losing strategies that we covered are 1, needing to be right; 2, controlling your partner; 3, unbridled self-expression; and 4, retaliation and or punishment. And today we're going to talk about the 5th losing strategy, which is unvirtuous sacrifice or resentful accommodation. When we think of the word sacrifice, it usually brings to the mind giving up something valuable to gain something even more important. So one example is when I was 32 years old, we had 2 kids. We just finished building our house and we decided it was time for us to go back to school. I mean, I know went back to school, but I always say we.
Yeah.
And we sold everything. I mean, think about a yard sale where you sell the mattresses, you sell the house, you sell the swing set, plates, dishes, everything. And we did that because we were moving in with my mother-in-law, who was grateful enough to put us up. And you've heard me talk about that. I didn't have the best relationship with her. And we lived with my mother-in-law for 5 years.
5 years.
And we made a lot of sacrifices with our time and our money so that I could build and gain the knowledge and get a skill that would pay off dividends later in years. And so this is a type of personal sacrifice.
So you're sacrificing for yourself and it creates a benefit down the road.
Yeah. But when it comes to marriage,
here we go.
Sacrifice can be a bit of a slippery slope.
It can.
Sacrifice itself is an integral part, maybe even a backbone of most intimate relationships.
And sacrificing your own interests for the sake of someone you love, that's always been seen as a strong way to show that you care about someone. And in marriage, most people believe, as I said earlier, that the more spouses sacrifice for each other, well, the more perfect their marriage is supposed to be. But is that actually true? Or
does that work out as well as it should?
Or how does that work out? And like you said, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah. So you may have heard or read the story, The Gift of the Magi, by O. Henry. And so it starts out by illustrating this impoverished couple, and it's a Christmas story, and they wanted to give each other these meaningful Christmas gifts, but they really didn't have the money to do so. So the wife wants to give her husband a watch fob for his favorite possession, which is his pocket watch. And the husband wants to give his wife a comb for her hair, right?
Her most prized possession.
Her most prized possession.
Yeah.
So he sells his watch to buy the comb.
Yep.
And she cuts her hair and sells it to buy him a watch fob. and it's so cute.
But disturbing. At the same time.
Yeah, this sacrifice that they gave to each other for Christmas.
Here's the thing. While sacrifice is often seen as the backbone of relationships, it does have its downsides.
It can, yep.
So what's the difference between, let's call it virtuous sacrifice and unvirtuous sacrifice when it comes to marriage? Well, in any healthy relationships, there's times when we are obviously going to set aside our immediate desires for the greater good of the relationship or for the family all the time.
Yeah.
And this kind of sacrifice would be virtuous because it benefits everyone involved. That's the key difference. And it benefits the person who is making the sacrifice, and it benefits everyone that's within that system.
Yeah. For example, I might enjoy some downtime at the end of the day to decompress.
Okay.
Right. But scrolling on my phone at the dinner table, even if it helps me relax, isn't isn't really good for me, my family, or my relationship. So I can choose to wait. I sacrifice the need for now, and wait until the kids have gone to bed to indulge in that if I want to. And it allows me a couple of things. It allows me to be fully present with my family at dinner and fully present with the kids. I make this choice not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it benefits everyone in the family. And in the end, we all function better because of this small sacrifice.
Right. So it helps everyone.
Yeah.
Now, the opposite of that, so unvirtuous sacrifice, we've also called this resentful accommodation in the past.
We've talked about that. Yeah.
Right. It's a form of underfunctioning. We're going to talk about what that means. But really what we're doing isn't something that benefits the whole. We're just trying to avoid something. We're avoiding some kind of discomfort.
So again, what does underfunctioning mean?
So underfunctioning in this case means taking the easy way out. So dodging something that we're fully capable of handling, like expressing our needs and our desires and asking for those things to be met, but dodging that because it's uncomfortable.
Oh, okay.
And of course, that isn't living in authentically or in integrity. And when either partner falls into unvirtuous sacrifice, they both end up underfunctioning. And that's when nobody really ends up benefiting rather than the opposite, which is everybody benefits. So maybe an example would be useful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this isn't a true story, but let's say I don't want to have sex because I see it as indulgent. Maybe I see it as hedonistic. Okay. Terrible view.
Really bad idea.
Right.
Yeah.
You, on the
Terrible
other hand,
perspective.
in this example, let's say you view sex as a way for us to connect and share ourselves with each other, to share our minds, share our body.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Obviously, two very divergent ideas, two different desires.
And way more common in relationships than it should be. Yeah. We hear it a lot.
And let's say in this case, you and I have disagreed about this a lot. You're tired of that conflict. You're tired of when that arises, how our desires end up clashing. And so you don't want to face the discomfort of the invalidation that you feel for standing up for your needs.
Yeah. So I'll just stop asking.
So you give up and you just give in to me. But deep down, what ends up happening? You end up hating me for it or resenting me for it. That's what we call resentful accommodation or unvirtuous sacrifice.
That makes sense. Yeah. That's super common. And even though we might try to convince ourselves that this kind of sacrifice is virtuous, right? Like I'm just doing it to keep the peace. There's nothing virtuous about resentful accommodation. It doesn't challenge the relationship or the people within it to grow up.
Yeah, that's key.
Yeah. In this case, giving up what you truly want isn't for the betterment of the marriage or anyone involved. It's simply a way to just reduce the immediate tension between the two of you, leading to both partners underfunctioning.
Exactly. So in that example, I don't have to grow up. I don't have to face my limitations about sex. And you don't have to face the invalidation that you might feel from standing up for your needs, which causes both of us to underfunction and neither one of us to be pressured into growing up.
Yeah.
So in short, resentful accommodation, it's just when you avoid taking responsibility for your own wants and your own desires by accommodating someone else's.
So why do we engage in resentful accommodation anyway?
Good question.
Yeah. There are two main reasons people tend to fall into this pattern. The first one stems from a one down or inferior position where we fear our desires or our wants aren't worthy. So we sacrifice our wants and attempt to earn our worthiness by trying to make ourselves indispensable. We think if I do everything you need or want, then you'll need me or you'll want me in your life or you'll see me worthy or legitimate. And I remember doing some of this in our relationship.
We're going to talk about how we actually did this pattern.
Yeah.
And that, yes. So one way is the one down position where I'll just do whatever. For some people, actually helps them to avoid actually even defining who they are and what they want. Some people really aren't clear on the things that they desire. And so they use this as a way to just be whatever their partner wants them to be. I'll just morph. You just love me and I'll morph into whatever it is you need me to be.
Yeah.
So this first type of unvirtuous sacrifice or resentful accommodation is a way to get approval. It's a way to get validation. And it's basically just saying, I will give you everything. I won't pay any attention to my needs. And I'll do this so that you'll think highly of me, so that you'll love me, so that you'll approve of me. And I will do whatever you want and need without any consideration of my own needs.
Yeah. And the second reason we So we said there were two. And the second reason that we engage in this resentful accommodation is more from the superior one-up position. Here we sacrifice not because we feel unworthy, but because we don't want to take ownership of our own needs and desires. And having desires or needs might be seen as vulnerable, and we don't want to see ourselves as vulnerable. We want to see ourselves as heroic. So we sacrifice to simply help out our poor, needy spouse. So in the example of sex.
Oh, I'll just fine, whatever, you poor thing. I'll just give it to you once a month.
Yeah, because
And
you
that'll make
need
you
it.
happy.
Yeah, that'll make you happy. Yeah.
Right. And by accommodating their desires, we avoid exposing our own vulnerabilities, i.e. our own needs, because we have to be seen as heroic. And so this mindset sort of gives someone this pseudo sense of being stronger than their partner, and it leads to a sense of entitlement. So this entitlement allows them to oftentimes justify going out and taking what it is they want anyway, often outside of the relationship. So
because they're heroic.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just taking care of your needs because you're less than, but I'm going to go outside the marriage and get those needs fulfilled somewhere else. So this can oftentimes lead to physical affairs, emotional affairs. I'll go drink more. And now you've given me justification to go do that, or do out, drugs, or seeking other types of objectified forms of sex, pornography.
Yeah.
Right. So that's from the one up position where I'm the hero. I'm just serving you, and I'll go get my needs met.
And I deserve something for being the hero.
Yes.
So whether you're doing unvirtuous sacrifice from the one down or from the one up position, it's always very costly to the relationship.
It's always costly. And that's the key with all of these losing strategies, is they're always going to be costly to the relationship. In this case, with resentful accommodation, it's costly for a lot of reasons. First, it's not honest. You're not bringing your authentic self or your true desires into the relationship, which means we're not showing who we really are. We're not allowing ourselves to be known to one another. And so therefore, because that is the definition of intimacy, being known to one another.
Absolutely.
We're not able to connect at an intimate level. So, right? Because after all, how can you love someone that isn't showing you who they really are? Why else is it costly?
It's not sustainable.
Yeah.
No one can continue to sacrifice their needs for, on a long-term basis without it taking a toll on the relationship. You're just going to have this imbalance. It's always going to be a one up and a one down. And eventually the person who's being pressed down, whose autonomy is being just shoved all the way down, who's always in second place is going to rebel.
Right. Right. It's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And third, it's also costly because it undermines genuine virtuous sacrifice, right? I want those acts of service to matter. So if Robert does something for me, I want him to do it because of the joy and the fulfillment that he gets by helping me meet my needs, and vice versa. So
yes,
I would say resentful accommodation kills the joy that we would receive from really being able to do that.
Yeah. And fourth, the long-term impact is catastrophic. It becomes so easy to resent or even hate the other person for your sacrifice, even though you're the one choosing this sacrifice, and you're diminishing your needs
in the process
just to keep the relationship happy.
Exactly.
Yeah. This can be such a sneaky pattern that couples, they do it all the time. And at first glance, you might think, oh, that's not me.
I don't do that.
Yeah, I don't do that. But if you really self-reflect and ask, how might I be doing this pattern? Like, how am I showing up with this pattern in our relationship? You might be surprised how often this pattern and how often you've done these things in your relationship.
For example, I was working with a couple last year, I think it was, and the husband said something like, well, she made me quit my job to go do something different that paid more money.
Yeah.
And he had so much resentment, and he really wanted to leave the marriage. And in fact, he even was punishing her, which was what we talked about last week's episode, retaliation, by staying at the job late, working long hours, staying overnight at his office and not coming home. And so he was even punishing her for it. But he wasn't owning his choice. And so I asked him, well, how did she make you go get this other job? And he told me all the ways that she was pressuring him, which were losing strategies as well. But the thing is that he never took responsibility for his own desires. Instead, he chose to put the blame at her feet and then resented her for the job that he took and chose to take, and resented her for the hours and the sacrifices he was choosing to make. A lot of times we don't want to define, or we don't want to stand up for our own desires, especially when they're different from our partner's desires. And we'd rather just yield and then play the martyr, put everything in the blame at our partner's feet so that we can say, you're responsible for this. This is your fault. And this is a very easy thing to do, but it's always going to cause resentment in marriage.
Yeah, always. You can't hold on to something like that, especially like a job or anything. And I think we're probably going to talk a little bit about that in our relationship.
So I have a question. And
Okay,
so this is a very unscripted part of this episode because
buckle up.
We have had this in our marriage. We've had resentful accommodation. It is one of the strategies that who is used?
Probably me.
Probably you.
Yeah.
We'll talk about
why.
Not
probably. There's only me. It's just me.
It's definitely a little bit more of a Robert strategy, or was in the past. So
was in the past.
Did you ever have some resentment towards me over things?
Oh yeah. I was pissed.
Yeah. Do you have an example of this losing strategy in our marriage?
Oh yeah. So let's see.
Can you give me an example?
Oh, how about our first Christmas?
First Christmas, second Christmas, third Christmas, 10th Christmas.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe by then I was feeling better about it.
What was it specifically that you resented?
Well, I mean, you remember the conversation when I said, what are we doing for Christmas? And you said, this is how Christmas goes.
Truthfully, if I'm being honest, I don't remember, because I probably just told you, no, this is how it's going to go.
Yeah, this is how Christmas is going to go.
And I forgot about it.
Yeah. And you forgot about it because, well, you got your way on Christmas.
And I had to be right.
Yeah. And that was your thing. And then I just figured, well, I guess maybe next year we'll talk about it, but we never did.
So do you remember, this was a long time ago, but do you remember if you did it more from the one up position, or you had to be the hero, or the one down position where you felt like you needed validation and approval? Or what would you say in that instance?
I don't know.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
How do you think
I still had a lot of abandonment wounds back then. So probably one down position. I wanted to be seen as helpful and useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on where that came from?
I mean, it was pretty tumultuous growing up. And I think maybe I know we had to accommodate my mom a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I probably just figured that's the way things were supposed to go.
Mm-hmm.
But that might have been, when we talk about like when that switched, a lot of that switched after some NLP work. But
so I think actually, as you're saying that, I'm thinking back to a couple episodes ago when we talked about unbridled self-expression, and you talked about in your house growing up, there was always the mood that you had to accommodate.
Yeah.
And depending on whether it was happy or depressive or anxious, you had to be the one to accommodate toward it, walk on eggshells to make sure that there was peace in the house.
Yeah.
So do you think that's where that came from?
Yeah. They always say you marry your mother. So
sorry about that.
It's all right. There's a lot of growing, but not facing these things, right? We just sort of shoved them down.
Well, and I think that in all fairness, I'm putting you into the spotlight, but I'm sure in your mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of my losing strategies, at least in your mind, probably justified your losing strategy of resentful accommodation.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Right. So for me, my part in that would have been, okay, I'm right. Holidays are the way that I want them to be. We're going to do them the way they were for me growing up. We're going to do presents and Christmas Eve and all these things my way. I need to be right. I'm going to control you. So that's losing strategy number one, losing strategy number two. And if I didn't get my way, I probably would have punished you, and probably did punish you if I didn't get my way. So that's retaliation. So I'm sure, right, we all play a part in the pattern. So even though
everybody has their role to play,
right?
You're complicit or you're not.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know how to talk about what my needs were.
Yes.
Or why it was important to me, or I didn't even know it was important to me until I got there and realized that I missed my family.
And I was too immature to listen because mine were right.
Yeah, we didn't, and that, and to just kind of navigate that a little bit farther, I remember on Christmas Day, as Christmas Day came around, you would always ask me why I was so sullen.
Mm.
You remember those times? I would always get sort of in a mood right around the middle of Christmas Day after all the kids and everything, because then I realized I missed my family and I didn't have it. I remember that. So now it's sort of coming
Yeah,
back
I don't even think I had the capacity at that time to look in the mirror and think that that had anything to do with me. I
Yeah.
probably justified it and said that you were just tired
Yeah.
from staying up all night, putting presents together or
Yeah.
something.
But, and I don't want to put such a dark cloud on that because yes, it started that way, but some of my fondest memories of how Christmas and our kids and everything, that your family tradition became my family tradition for so many years. And our kids grew up with that. And I got just as excited about Christmas. I still missed my family, but that piece was there.
But that's true. But what do you think it cost us? Because we're talking about costly strategies. What do you think that cost us in the short term before we got to that point?
Oh, it cost us Christmas Eve sex for sure.
Okay. What else though?
Well, that part of it is the closeness that we probably could have had. Not if it was just Christmas Eve, but the closeness that we could have had,
Yeah. And intimacy, not in the sexual form per se, but intimacy in being known.
Yeah.
Because I really wasn't getting to know you during that time and what was important to you. And maybe we could have created some really beautiful traditions of our own that our kids would have just enjoyed even more or just as much.
Yeah.
That would have been important to you and me. And we would have found a way to dialogue about those things had we known how to do that back then.
And who knows those questions? Now those are great questions to ask. Like, how do we want to treat these events in our relationship? There's great newlywed questions or engaged questions.
Yeah.
Or people who are just trying to figure it out.
Yeah. So what do you think? Do you think there's a place for sacrifice in marriage?
I mean, absolutely. It makes sense when you're sacrificing for the good of the relationship. I mean, probably one of our biggest sacrifices and also going back to school meant I sold my construction company. I sold all my tools. I sold my identity, which was, I was a home builder. I sold that in order to take the next step in our lives as we came together. And so, I think it makes sense. And that's why I always say we went back to school because it wasn't just me. Like you had the bigger part as well. And I think when you come together and you sacrifice and you build a goal and you see that goal accomplished, that's amazing for the relationship. So despite all the resentful accommodation that we just talked about, like think about the strength and fortitude that our relationship had because we had this mammoth goal that was 5, 6, 7
something
years
that
out.
we both valued, something that was important and mattered to both of us, and we worked towards that.
Yeah, and we sacrificed both financially and with material things, and and you had to go back to work while I was busy, studying, hitting the books, and going to school.
Right. So there's lots of ways in which we can sacrifice together, and joint sacrifice in marriage requires openness. It requires honesty. It's done when both spouses are fully choosing what's involved. And since sacrifice is and should be a mutual decision, it requires joint effort, like you talked about. We're working together. And because of that, there was no expectation of payback. Like you didn't expect me to pay you back. There was no expectation for your sacrifice. There's no keeping score. So it doesn't hurt the relationship.
No, I think that it built our relationship so much stronger.
Completely.
That one event of going back to school and seeing us sacrifice together
that made us
created
stronger.
Such a bond for us, and not just in the education that I received, but just the knowledge that if we pulled together instead of in divergent paths, I think that's where we started to come together.
So that is the difference. Virtuous sacrifice will always benefit the relationship system. It will benefit both people involved, whereas unvirtuous sacrifice will always lead to resentment, and it won't cause or push anybody to grow up or to get better.
Yeah.
So when we are advising couples to be cautious about the types of sacrifice that exist in their marriage, we want them to understand that even though it might seem virtuous, and we can convince ourselves that it is every time we give, even though it's at the cost of our own desires and needs, that can lead to big problems in the relationship. And on the other hand, if you both agree that it's a short-term sacrifice that can lead to a long-term benefit for both of you, that's something that can be really good for the marriage and can help both of you to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Yeah. So let's wrap up this episode with some self-reflection questions and some journaling. Okay. So question 1, in what ways have I sacrificed for my partner that were not truly virtuous?
Okay.
Okay. 2, how or what has this cost our family or relationship?
Okay. What does it cost us?
Yep. 3, here's the easy one. Make a list of the resentments that I still hold towards my partner.
I don't know
And
if that's
how many
easy.
of these stem from avoiding a conversation about my own needs and desires?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Number 4, when have I knowingly looked the other way, like I did when we were younger, aware that my partner was accommodating my desires, even though it was at a cost or an expense to their own desires? When have I looked the other way? And number 5, what would it look like if we were both a little more honest with each other about our individual desires? Number 6, what's one small change that I can make today after listening to this episode? And number 7, am I brave enough to share these observations about myself with my partner?
Ooh. Well, these are some very powerful questions, really designed to help you self-reflect. The key word here is self. The hardest work in the relationship often involves looking at ourselves honestly, seeing how we're participating in the relationship problems. The only person you can effectively change in this relationship is you. And when you step out of the pattern, the funny thing is the pattern can no longer continue.
Right. Well, that's going to bring us to the end of this episode and also the end of this particular losing strategy. Make sure to subscribe to the show if you have not yet, because we will be sharing next week losing strategy number 6. And we want to thank you for being here today. We're grateful for you. And we kindly ask, if you haven't yet, please leave a comment and a 5-star review. It does really help us to make a greater impact and to be able to help more couples. And if you know someone who this episode might help, please consider sharing it with them.
As always, be kind to each other, take care of each other, put each other first. It's the small things done often that make the greatest impact.